All right, this is the House of Tech, where crypto meets Canberra. I'm Fred Chabessa, co-founder of Finder.
And I'm Andrew Bragg, Senator for New South Wales.
It's all happening here, Andrew. We've got a big interview today.
Big one. So we've got Kain Warwick today, the founder of Synthetix, and blueshyft.
There it is.
So a leader in the crypto world.
Founder of Synthetix and really a pioneer, I would say, in the Australian crypto space particularly as well.
I'm excited.
Welcome, Kain, to the House of Tech.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited as well.
Awesome. When it comes to your story, Kain, as well, it's quite incredible. A tennis coach, a band, and then digital assets. Tell us the story of that journey and what's sort of the punctuation points that I think the aspiring entrepreneurs in Australia need to sort of hear about.
Yeah, so my dad was a tennis player, which is where the tennis coaching came from. So I grew up around tennis, and when I was younger, it just kind of made sense as a job to be a tennis coach for a while. And I started at UNSW studying genetics, and I was terrible at organic chemistry. And after about a year, I decided that I was going to drop out and move to the US and join a startup. So that was where I kind of caught the startup bug. So then I lived in the US for a while. I lived in Boston for a bit. I played in a band, did a bunch of other random stuff. And then I decided in 2009 to kind of get back into the startup scene, moved back to Australia, started a startup with one of the people who still works at Synthetix today, JJ. And yeah, we started this online retail thing, didn't work out, started a few other startups, and we founded blueshyft, which is a payment gateway. We were kind of solving a problem at the time for a lot of crypto exchanges who were being debanked by our friendly banking oligopoly. And so we were a way for them to kind of get cash into the crypto ecosystem that kind of bypassed the traditional banking system. And so that started taking off. And then I got deeper into the Ethereum ecosystem and eventually decided to launch my own project, which was Haven, which then pivoted into Synthetix and became one of the kind of top DeFi projects.
So, Kain, what do you make of this debanking issue? I mean, you mentioned then that it's part of the major issue of oligopolies in Australia, which I would agree with. How did that manifest for you? And can you give us some of the really bad examples you've heard about bad behavior here?
Yeah, so a good friend of mine is Asher Tan from CoinJar. I was actually the first person when he posted something on LinkedIn back in like 2012 saying like, hey, I'm going to start this payment gateway for Bitcoin. And I was the first person to respond, maybe the only person actually. And we set it up and no one really wanted to use it. But I think the CoinJar story, and hopefully I'm not talking out of school here. He might not be super happy with me talking about this too much, but we used to have to change their banking integration. So we had this back-end banking integration for the payment gateway. We would have to change it like every 3 weeks because they would literally get debanked like almost instantaneously. And they would have to set up like some new entity. So they always had like a bunch of entities kind of sitting there waiting to cycle through. It was just chaos. The banks were like super adversarial. Anything that touched crypto, they would shut it down. I think blueshyft was debanked like 3 times as well. We eventually were able to find a banking relationship through Manuva, who are kind of like a fintech company in Sydney. But yeah, it was honestly one of the biggest challenges is you never knew when you're going to get that nice little letter saying, thanks very much for your business, but your bank account's been closed.
And is that a foreign bank you're using now, or is it an Australian?
It's an Australian bank.
Right.
Yeah, so they have like an integration with an Australian bank. So I think it's gotten better. It's still not perfect. I do still hear stories of people being debanked, but it has gotten a little bit better. But there's no question that the banks, when you look at the kind of overall crypto landscape in Australia, the banks are one of the biggest challenges, I think, for crypto companies. The regulatory environment is actually very permissive, and I think regulators have done a really good job. The banks, on the other hand, maybe not as good a job. So.
I think you've been addressing that, Andrew.
Well, I'm not a regulator, thank goodness.
No.
I never want to be a regulator, but they do a very important job. But I'd much prefer make law than enforce law.
I think some of your new laws are addressing some of the debanking, or your inquiry was at least.
We need to get we need to get those laws embedded. So that's why we need to win the election.
There we go.
Yeah.
Kain, for everyone who's listening, if they don't know, you're a very, very big proponent of Ethereum. And maybe just to introduce that, can you sort of tell us, I think there's a lot of talk right now, layer ones, Solana. I think there was this EOS thing once. These are there was everything's apparently supposed to have killed Ethereum, but obviously it's not. And so just I think it's just to set the scene, if you could just talk a little bit, what is Ethereum and maybe why is it important for Web3 businesses building on it?
Yeah, so Ethereum is basically a platform that allows people to develop decentralized applications. That's essentially what it does, right? So it's this kind of global computer that anyone can deploy software onto, and then anyone can access that as long as you've got an internet connection. And it was kind of the first, most dominant smart contract platform in the ecosystem. There were other things that kind of did smart contract-like things, but it was the first, network that was really built from the ground up to kind of handle smart contracts and all of these decentralized applications. And so it had a significant lead. And through all of like 2015 to kind of late 2017 and the last crypto boom cycle before this most recent one, all of the ICOs and all of the things that were happening on Ethereum. It was very much the kind of epicenter of what was going on in crypto. And we then, I think, got into the bear market. A lot of the people who had raised funds during the bull market were building things, and it was starting we were starting to see more activity, more organic activity, more transactions, and Ethereum kind of became a victim of its own success, where the number of different applications that were running on Ethereum and the amount of activity that was happening made the cost of transacting very high. And so a lot of people who entered the ecosystem in the last 18 months, as the kind of market has come back and people have become more bullish, were priced out of using Ethereum. And so these alternative L1s, Solana, Avalanche, BSC, et cetera, have really been able to kind of get a foothold while Ethereum has been trying to work out how to scale. I think we're at a point now where Ethereum is scaling, but it's taken much longer than we had all hoped. The merge and ETH2 was all supposed to happen, back in 2018 or something like that. So we're a little bit behind on the roadmap. But I think Ethereum is finally catching up. And I think we will get to a point where, Ethereum becomes the dominant smart contract platform again.
So in this DeFi space, what do you think are the 2 or 3 major law reforms that we need to prioritize? Because we have made many commitments across the crypto landscape, and it is a large and diverse area. So what would you say would be the 2 or 3 most important things in that DeFi space?
I think there's probably only one in my mind that really stands out. And I think the primary one is that there's a lot of uncertainty around what the governance structures that are being built right now, and they're very experimental. They don't fit into a simple box of a corporation or a partnership or something like that. What are these DAOs, and how does the existing infrastructure that we have, the existing regulatory framework, and all of the stuff that we deal with traditional finance, how does that interface with a DAO? And how do we create more certainty for DAOs? So Synthetix is a DAO. It's not domiciled anywhere. There's no entities. It doesn't exist in the eyes of the law, if you will, right? Yet it still is a coordination mechanism that a bunch of people are working on and trying to do stuff within. So the question that sort of Synthetix, I guess, prompts is like, how does Synthetix interface with the real world? And that's something that I think there's a lot of uncertainty around.
Yeah, because I think from a government point of view, we always look at these things from the perspective of how can you get more choice, more agency into the community, and also more jobs. But on the other side of the ledger, you also got to work out, well, if your whole corporate landscape effectively is going to be disrupted with DAOs, right, which is could be a positive disruption, what does that mean for your tax base, for example? So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on the tax piece here?
I do, and I think that's, fundamentally revenue is critical to anything existing, right? Like, for something to continue to operate, whether it's a government or a company or something, it needs revenue, right? And in the case of the government, it needs tax revenue. And I think there is an opportunity. There've been some jurisdictions that have sort of said, well, we want to attract crypto by having zero taxes, right? Which is maybe not the most sustainable approach.
We can't do that.
Yeah, we can't do that, right? So the question then is, okay, where's the kind of equilibrium point between providing certainty for DAOs and providing a safe place for DAOs to domicile? And what does that domicile look like? And what is the cost of that certainty to the DAO? Right. So I think if there were a framework whereby, the government was to say, you can come and domicile your DAO in Australia. We're a very permissive and open and, transparent market. We've got all of these advantages. This is the cost. This is what it will cost you. And here's the certainty that you've been seeking, which everyone in the space is seeking certainty right now. The cost of certainty is not zero, right? I think that most DAOs would pay something for that cost. And there would be significant inflows of tax revenue through DAOs, because there would be some framework whereby they felt like they were able to domicile in Australia and operate here.
I think it's it's a great solution.
That's a key issue.
Yeah.
That's going to be one of the key law reforms of the next parliament.
Excellent. It's one of the big ones, because I think there's a lot of DAOs, and I think there's a lot of DAOs really popping up right now as well, right? New ones, Kain, as well, all around the world. So finding a home for that is a great opportunity.
Yeah, the combined DAO treasuries, I think there's a couple of dashboards online that show it. The combined DAO treasuries is something in the order of like $100 billion USD. Wow. And those DAO treasuries are in some cases domiciled places, some cases not. Some are more or less, extra jurisdictional. But in all of those cases, they lack certainty. They lack a lot of certainty. And I think the certainty that a kind of robust regulatory framework could provide would be very much welcomed by the crypto community and the DAO community.
Massive opportunity there for Australia as well, I guess. Want to just talk going back. I think this is a bit of a technical question, but going to try and shoehorn it as best I can into, because I think that's a major point. But we, obviously, it's very timely right now. With Andrew, you did a big talk on Monday, and I think there's a lot of there's a consultation paper right now, so it's super exciting times, and things are changing. And the other thing that's changing is you've got a lot of these. So with Ethereum, you to speed it up, there's been a lot of extra layers, like layer 2s on top. And I think this is a bit of a technical question. So Vitalik, who was very instrumental in building Ethereum, he recently wrote about cross-chain bridges being a problem. So for everyone listening, sort of maybe if you could explain this idea of this layer 2 idea, and maybe what's this bridge, and how is that relevant, and how is that important?
Yeah, so I think there's two kind of scaling pathways, right? Broadly, one is just build more networks, right? And if you imagine this in the framework of like the internet, right? It'd be like if you just kept building like individual siloed internet that people could build web pages on, right? And they weren't connected to one another. And so if you wanted to do anything, if you wanted to pay someone in one of these other internets, you would need to go and have a bridge to get across there, right? And that's kind of been the primary way that Web3 has scaled. You just have Solana, and then you have Avalanche, and you have BSC, and you have Cardano, and you have all of these different networks that are all vying to kind of get people to deploy applications on. What Ethereum is doing is slightly different. It's saying, let's actually scale vertically. Let's have the Ethereum layer 1 be the base layer where everything settles on. It's the settlement layer for all of these transactions. And then we're going to have like a compute layer that sits on top of that. And that will be far cheaper for people to transact on. And we will take all those transactions and we'll kind of roll them up and we'll put them onto L1. The problem is that that's a very hard technical thing to do, and it's taken us a lot longer to get to the point where this is viable. But we're now at a point where we have Arbitrum and Stockware and several other networks that are all in production. They're working, and I think that that scaling solution of having a unified network is going to be the thing that over the next 3 to 5 years dominates. But for the last it's been this kind of sideways movement of multiple networks, which is not ideal.
So we've got to ask you a few strange questions, otherwise it wouldn't be a very good podcast.
Love it.
So were you playing tennis as well?
Yes, I was a tennis player. Yeah.
Yeah. So did you ever? I'm wondering if you had the same problem I've had for the last 22 years. That I never got over Pat Rafter's loss to Goran Ivanisevic in that Wimbledon final win 2000. Do you think about that every day like me, or do you think about other things?
It's funny. Goran was my idol. He was the person that I really kind of idolized as a tennis player. Right. And so I think that was kind of an interesting event for me because you have the Aussie side where and then you got this person who's been like your idol. So I think I was a bit neutral on the outcome. Okay. Of that event.
Right, because you remember, Rafter went through that period in the mid-90s where he wore those horrible brown shirts when he was I thought maybe he'd lost a bet or something and he had to wear like the worst shirt in Australia or something, and then he came back in that late 90s period and he was actually he had good sort of moxie and good tempo and anyway, it took me a long time to get over that and I don't think I've ever really recovered.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's funny that era, the pre kind of Federer era, how different it is, right? And now obviously, it became Federer and the other guys, but I think that there is very clear demarcation point between the kind of whatever pre-2000s tennis and then after 2000.
Yeah, well, Rafa has been my favorite. I find Federer boring. I think. Novak, he has caused his own sort of
he's got his
problems.
Own issues. Yep.
Yeah. And then Rafa is good, and I'm glad he won. Who do you like?
I actually remember the tennis back in the 80s, like Lendl and Agassi and Sampras, and that's what I remember. And Boris Becker, I loved Boris Becker. I loved Ivanisevic as well. Actually, Goran was amazing. The serve, just no backhand.
Big serve.
Just serve volley.
Just serve it out. Serve it out. Exactly.
Win service and just cobble together enough points in the tiebreakers.
Yeah.
Next question, Kain, is there's a lot of talk about space right now and going into space. If you could go into space right now, would you go? And
100%. I've already signed up. I've signed up for Virgin Galactic ticket, no question. Put me on a rocket instantly.
Wow.
No hesitation.
That's our first
and why is that? Why is that?
I think, we live in a very exceptional time where I'm a huge sci-fi nerd, right? I've been reading sci-fi my whole life. And the fact that we are, obviously we've been putting people in space for a long time, but the number of people who got to experience that is such a tiny fraction of humanity. The fact that we're having this massive expansion in terms of who can access space, I think is and yeah, I would not hesitate. If you said there's a ticket, you can hop on there in an hour, I'd be there. I'd be at the spaceport.
Well, it's very democratic, isn't it? I'm not sure that when Kennedy said he wanted to put a man on the moon by the end of the 60s, that he would have imagined that we'd be sending civilians to, or private citizens to space.
Well, there's a lot of space out there. We've got one last food question.
Okay.
Now, you spend a lot of time in America. Can you explain to our listeners what are home fries?
I'm not a good food person. I'm an extremely picky eater, and I'm very rigid in what I eat. So when I go to New York, I literally go to the same pizza place 3 times a week and get a slice of pepperoni pizza. So I actually don't even know what fries are. It's probably some weird fries with gravy or something poured on them. God knows. I have no idea.
I think that's a pretty good description.
It is a good description. That's pretty good. That's excellent.
So I think that we've been able to get a couple of really key takeaways from this.
Yeah.
And for me, it is the essential need to lock down the DAO in some sort of a legislative framework, ideally this year.
Yep.
What about you?
Well, I think that, and also some sort of clarity as well. That obviously that gives clarity for new startups, and also Ethereum is, and obviously it's scaling and its potential, and it's there's a lot of talk about other chains, but right now still such a strong chain and still such a strong chain to build on for Web3 companies. I think that's a key idea.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's chat. Thank you, Kain, for joining us, and thanks for all the support you give to the tech sector here in Australia, and thanks for your leadership. It's really appreciated. Now, we will ask you to provide some input into these various government processes if you can, so we can scoop out the best parts of your brain. And
sure.
That's good.
Awesome. And Kain and everyone else who's listening, obviously you obviously have a lot more podcasts, so do check those out. And if you are listening to this one, do subscribe, do send us a review on wherever you are listening to this channel, and share it with a friend. Friends share podcasts. That's how they spread, and get it out there. And thank you so much again, Kain, for joining us on the House of Tech.
A pleasure. Thanks for having me. Amazing.